Morning, everyone. As you start to join us, if you'd just like to pop yourselves on mute, just so we can avoid any dogs barking, deliveries being delivered, etc. Thank you. Right, good morning, everybody. I'll just introduce myself first. My name's Oliver Smith. I'm from the Employee Ownership Association. I'll get us started because we need to start on time at 11 o'clock because we've got quite a bit to get through, but we will have people joining us over the next few minutes. Just in terms of some housekeeping, I'm sure we're all very understanding of what Zoom is and how it operates. But if you want to ask any questions at any point during the presentation that we're going to do or the breakout rooms we're going to have, please just use your chat feature. If you use your cursor, you'll be able to see chat on there. What I'll try and do is facilitate the questions through the presentation, and your host of your breakout room at the halfway point will also use the chat feature to try and extract some questions from you as well. But welcome. So the purpose of today, it's our third virtual network meeting. These meetings are set up in order to bring our members together in the virtual sense of what we do. And it's a great opportunity to bring people together because never at such a time have we really wanted to demonstrate the impact of the community around employee ownership. Even more so given the announcement that we had yesterday that times are going to get a little bit more challenging, as we probably expect, but we do need to demonstrate and get people coming together and keeping in touch. So what we've been doing, very briefly, we've been facilitating connections between members. We've been either on a one-to-one basis. We've been hosting these virtual network meetings, allowing people to come together. But also members have been utilising the EO Hub, our online platform that enables you to connect and search and connect with other members. So bringing people together. And also, you'll have seen the communication from us last week around EO Boost. So just to add a little bit more meat to the bone, EO Boost is a 3-day digital event taking place on the 24th, 25th and 26th of November. Very shortly, over the next few days, you'll all be able to register for that. It's completely free of charge, and that's due to our main sponsors at JCAD Associates and Postlethwaite. So thank you very much for that. And it comprises of keynote speakers and sessions that demonstrate what is good about employee ownership. Good governance, good engagement, good leadership, and what is good for the employee, the business, in the economy, all encompassed around EO. So you'll be able to register for that over the next few days. Additionally, what we've been doing is very much campaigning activity in line with the Bayes Committee post-pandemic economic growth inquiry and the CGT inquiry. We've been putting submissions forward to make sure employee ownership is still at the forefront of that and isn't lost in any of the melee of discussions that are going on at the moment. And also, we've put a proposal together for the comprehensive spending review to ensure that employee ownership still has a voice and hopefully some financial backing from government as well. If we don't ask, we don't get. So we're very much campaigning on behalf of the sector for that. So that's what we've been up to. I'll quickly now move us on to what's going to happen today. So the format of this virtual network meeting is going to be a presentation. Delighted to say that Chris from Wescotec, who's the MD, Chris Spinks, he's going to take you through the journey of employee ownership at the business. He's been MD for 18 months. The business has been employee owned for 18 months. So a bit of a journey for him personally. He's going to share some insight into the governance, the engagement, and how they've brought EO to life in their SME organisation. After that, we're going to break out into the rooms that you've selected to be in. So by the power of Zoom, you'll disappear from this room and you'll reappear where you're going to have conversations on the topics that you requested. And each of those rooms are going to be facilitated, one by myself and the other three by colleagues who will introduce themselves at that point. So, again, if you want to ask any questions, please use the chat function and submit those to Chris. And after he's finished speaking, we'll have a bit of a Q&A and I'll facilitate some of those questions. Fantastic. So, Chris, if you are ready, I'll hand over to you and you can introduce yourself and tell us about Wescotec.
Sorry, hope everyone can hear me. And I will share the screen, which hopefully will also work because I'm not all that with these bits of technology. Has that come through?
Not quite yet, Chris.
No.
No.
Nope. Okay. Well, it worked in rehearsal, as they always say, don't they?
It did. Chris, if you want to start and introduce yourself, it's absolutely fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thanks very much. Well, that's got things off to a good start, isn't it? My name's Chris Spinks. I'm the managing director of Wescotec, and the introductory slide that I had was my name and also a picture of what we actually do in the corner. So I'm going to have to try and explain that to you now. We manufacture vehicle activated signs and intelligent traffic safety systems. We've been in existence since 2001, and I'm sure those of you driving around the country will have seen either, hopefully, our signs, but there are a few other manufacturers out there, and they basically are activated by vehicles traveling at speed or when there's a requirement for a warning to be given. There we are. For a warning to be given, to give you a bit more information to be able to make a better decision about what's in front of you as you're driving down the road. We were founded in 2001 by a guy called Phil Hayton, who is still around. He is the archetypal eccentric British entrepreneur, and he won't mind me saying that. He has, I don't know if we can put the other slide on, Annabelle, but he has, there we are. He set the company up in 2001. He was, at the time, the clerk to the works of Norfolk County Council. We are based in Norfolk, and he, as these people do, came across an idea while he was in a pub with a behavioural psychologist who was specialising in driver behaviour. And they started talking in the pub over a few beers and came up with an idea which involved them sourcing a neon Budweiser sign, which they then altered to make a red outline with a white 30 in the middle. They then hid up in a hedge on a road into a Norfolk village with a battery and two connectors with this sign. And as a vehicle approached the 30 limit, they then put the connectors on the battery, the sign lit up, and the car slowed down. They then realised that actually they might be onto something there. And so Wescotec was born, as I say, in 2001. Phil didn't patent the idea for whatever reason. And so other people came into the market, but Wescotec was one of the forerunners, and Wescotec has always kind of formed itself around quality and around innovation, driven by Phil's entrepreneurial skills. So as the company grew, market grew, as these things became more prevalent, technology became more involved, and Phil then, as clerk to the works of the council, realised that he needed somewhere to be able to store components and manufacture things. So he had a container delivered to one of the council yards in deepest, darkest Norfolk. And unbeknownst to Norfolk County Council, he was working from that site, from the container, rent-free and everything else free, while he got things off the ground. And eventually the company got to a point where he finished with the council and set it up and put it into new premises. I then became aware of Westcotec because my previous job was as a roads policing chief inspector. I was Norfolk and Suffolk head of roads policing and firearms operations, and I became aware of some of the innovation that Westcotec were coming up with, and got to know the company. And as these things do, particularly in Norfolk, my wife also used to work with Phil at the council, and I hesitate to use the word incestuous as it's Norfolk, but you know what I mean. I then had a job, got a job at Westcotec in 2015 as part of the sales team. We do export a fair bit to Sweden. We have items in other countries as well, New Zealand, Dubai, Canada, Slovenia, and we're obviously with restrictions we've got at the moment, that's kind of stalled a little bit, but we are looking to export wider. An area of innovation that's particularly important to me is we've invented a mobile phone detection system, which is not a prosecution device, and it allows the detection of the mobile phone signal as a vehicle approaches a detector and then illuminates an LED sign further down the road to show the driver that they've been detected. It doesn't prosecute, it doesn't differentiate between drivers and passengers, but it is the only way of detecting things remotely at the moment. As I said, I came here as part of the sales team in 2016, January 2016, having retired in 2015, into the new world of private sector. Westcotec is quite an unusual company, so much so that Phil started talking about retiring. Nobody believed him, and then one day there was just he and I in the office, and he came through to me and said, "I'm going to retire, definitely. I'm going to put the company into employee ownership, and I'd like you to run it." I said to him, "What are you talking about? I joined the police at 19, I retired at 49, I don't know anything about running a business or anything else." He said, "You'll be fine," went back in his office and closed the door, and that was that. I ended up taking on the challenge of running Westcotec. That included then going into the employee ownership side of things. We are an SME, as Ollie has said. We have 25 employees, and we turn over around £3 million a year. Most of our customers are within the local authority, the public sector, highways, etc. We do a huge amount of work with parish councils and providing them with methods of volunteers being able to put the signs up and measure their speed and hopefully bring down the speed through the villages. And we also do work now with private sites as well. More and more emphasis on health and safety, more and more emphasis around protection of the staff from vehicle movements on large sites. So that's another area that we go into. Westcotec has always had a very high community support initiative and an ethos. I came here, as I said, fresh out of the police. Having been involved in roads policing, I was aware of a charity that was dealing with bereaved children, mostly from road collisions at my point. So I put the idea of Westcotec being able to put some money into supporting Nelson's Journey, which is the charity in Norfolk, for that. And that sat alongside exactly what we do in terms of road safety. And also we have, and some of you may know from my LinkedIn profile, if any of you are connected with me, that I'm involved heavily with Project Edward, which is an event that happened last week, which is every day without a road death. It's a UK-wide initiative involving Highways England, Royal Mail, the police, and it is again about trying to get people to make better decisions about their driving and how they get themselves home at the end of the day. So all of that being taken into account, the employee ownership side of things is something that Phil was really, really keen on doing, and he'd done some work in the background prior to us, or prior to him dropping the bombshell that he was going to retire and that he was actually going to hand the company over to us. The company was valued at around £3 million, with quite a decent amount of cash at the bank, but also some assets involving land and property, etc., around the county. One of the areas that Phil had become particularly interested in and has continued on through the company is around the green agenda, being very keen on environmental issues. We plant a tree for every sign that we sell. We have a plantation of several thousand trees that is almost full up now. So we're now looking at sponsoring trees in the area where we sell the signs. But just as an indicator of the type of guy he is, we had Tesla, company car for the sales manager. He then took that on himself, but his dog, a rather large Labradoodle, wouldn't fit in the back. So he decided that he wanted to make it into an estate car. And so he got some people together that he knew. Norfolk has quite a lot of history around motor racing and car design with Lotus here. And basically they cut the back off the car, made it into an estate car so the dog would fit in the back, and invented the world's fastest estate car by some considerable number. And it is still the only one in existence. There wasn't the market that he thought there might be for it, though he still drives around in it, and hopefully one day he might sell some, who knows. But that is the kind of guy he is, and that is how we became more and more involved in the environmental side of things with our corporate social responsibility. We run hybrid cars, we do a lot of solar and wind generated signs as well, and we also have partnered with a couple of companies from Poland, and we provide air pollution monitoring, and also we do solar powered benches as well, which are you just bolt them to the ground with 4 bolts, and then you can charge your mobile phone from the solar energy. You can have their own Wi-Fi hotspots, etc. And we're also awaiting delivery of our solar powered hand sanitizer, so which will obviously be something that we think may be popular as we go forward through what we're dealing with at the moment. Our journey into employee ownership was actually quite smooth. We took on Andrew Harrison, that a lot of you will know, as a consultant, and we decided that we had a bit of pain to go through in terms of some of the financial issues that were hanging over from the company 10 or 15 years ago, when there were some issues around the employee benefit trusts that Rangers Football Club fell foul of a few years ago, and there had been some issues as well with how the finance of the company were run a few years ago, which meant that we then had to take some of that on board and deal with that before we would sign the dotted line to take on the property. But Andrew was fantastic at guiding us through all of that, and the amount of support and the simplification that he gave us in terms of how we went from one thing to another was absolutely invaluable. Wescotec had 7 directors, including Phil, at the point of handover. That was reduced to 3, one of those being me, who had not been a director before. So there was a lot of communication and a lot of issues around how we sold that to our employees. It's a very close-knit family-type company, and not very good at dealing with change. There's a lot of, well, we've always done it that way, which is not always healthy within a company. So once the decision had been made that this was going to go ahead, we had a meeting with the directors, and then as soon as we possibly could, we then got everybody together off-site in a conference room and just tried to do away with any of the rumours, any of the myths, any of the gossip that was going on, because the most toxic thing possible, I feel, when you are trying to bring a group of people with you going through monumental change, is people who think they know trying to derail it. And standing up in front of those people, being upfront and honest, was actually, the feedback we've had since then, was actually one of the best things we could have done. And I would implore anybody who's watching this who is going down that road, one of the first things you need to do is set out that communication and be upfront, honest and open, and not allow those rumours to scotch things. So December 2018, we finally went across to employee ownership. Phil was adamant that he didn't want Wescotec to be saddled with debt in relation to buying itself, for want of a better phrase. So we used, or he asked for, some of the assets that were available to then be factored into the sale price of the company. So in effect, we are actually buying a £3 million company for £1.5 million in terms of cash. and some of the other items, including the Tesla estate car that I really didn't want anything to do with, were then part of the deal, and we now buy Wescotec Limited is now buying itself on behalf of Wescotec Employee Ownership Trust, and that's the model that we've gone down, because we felt that was much simpler in relation to not having to deal with individual shares, not having to deal with people buying shares, selling shares, coming into the company, leaving the company. Everything is owned by the trust, and then we use the profit-related bonus as our way of involving the company, involving the employees in feeling like they have that ownership and they have that stake in the company. And so far, the profits have been such that we've been able to, over the last 2 years, pay all of our employees pro rata the maximum £3,500 each, which is the tax-free amount that we can pay, and we will hopefully be able to do the same for next year. The way that we set the company up, Phil is the chair of the trust. For whatever reason, he wanted me to sit as a trustee as well, which I felt was a little bit of a conflict of interest, but he was quite happy with that, and at the moment things haven't caused any issues. We then have Andrew Harrison is an independent trustee, and we have 2 other members on the trust who are employees. So again, that helps to keep things on an even keel and hold me and the other 2 directors to account. We meet twice a year. The employee involvement in decision making and information sharing is based around a monthly meeting that we call our progress and monitoring review meeting. The directors are there, the heads of department are there, plus we have employee representation on there too. That everybody has a feed into that, everybody sees all the minutes, everybody is able to deal with those issues. I just want to kind of take on really the benefits that we had through employee ownership when we actually hit the COVID issues. I mean, I could talk as I did on the rehearsal for another 5 or 6 minutes, but I can see Ollie's face, so I won't do that. The benefit for me of the Employee Ownership Association, for me personally, was being able to log into those webinars that were every Thursday morning. That was the highlight of the lockdown for me. I don't see myself as a proper businessman. There's a lot of you out there who would have set up your businesses from nothing, maxed out your credit cards, and got to the position you're in yourself. That's not me. So I needed to soak up as much information as possible in relation to how the thing would move forward and how our decisions would be made. And the employee ownership was absolutely instrumental in that. Also, in relation to the employees, I would communicate regularly. I was quite happy to give financial details of how we were surviving through the actual lockdown period, particularly, and that meant that all of our employees knew that they had a job when the lockdown was finished. And the feedback I've had since then is that actually they had never had that level of knowledge about the company before, and they all felt absolutely secure that their job was going to be there. That meant that, from my point of view, I knew I had a workforce who weren't out there looking for new jobs, and that when we did get back up and running on our feet, that the people I wanted to be here would be there because we had made them feel safe and secure in their jobs. So that's my time. Lots of other things I could have spoken about. It's a very speedy run through of Wescotec, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you for that, Chris. Obviously some really interesting character, especially what Phil is and what he's set up and what he's tried to do. And he's clearly left a legacy that you recognise, and I'm sure by what you've said, the rest of the team recognise that legacy as well. So, yeah. Anybody's got any questions, just use the chat feature. If you want to fire them directly to me, that's absolutely fine, and I'll facilitate some of those. But Chris, if I can dive in straight away with you, you mentioned there about how you were communicating with the team around the financial situation, and you explained the reasons why you did that, which makes complete sense. So do you mind just for a few minutes telling us how you shared that financial information? Because that's critical, because in terms of how you share it will result in what people understand and interpret it from it.
Absolutely. During the lockdown period, I kept it really simple, really straightforward, and was telling the guys and girls, how much money we had in the bank, what the orders were, allowed them to see that that amount in the bank was actually not diminishing with any concern for us, and we were still receiving orders through lockdown. Basically, we furloughed the manufacturing side of the company, and we kept the office staff working from home. And so the feedback again that I've had from the guys and girls is that keeping them up to date with the orders that were coming in, letting them know that we were still, very much a functioning business, meant that they were completely reassured. In terms of how we share the financial and other performance issues with the workforce when we're back, like we are now normally, is that we have a financial sheet which is very straightforward, very simple. It has to be for me, obviously, more than anybody, and it's a very graphic explanation of where we are in relation to how much money we've got in the bank, what our running costs are. It's a very sort of distilled version, if you like, of what the books are, and I'm sure you all do this kind of thing yourselves. It was complete and utter rocket science to Wescotec, because Phil, as great as he was quite autonomous, and he had 7 directors, but they weren't doing much directing really. He did it all, and so they had no idea. They had no idea before as to how the company was doing and what was happening. And Phil also said, once he'd seen what we were doing, he said, I don't know how I ran the company for 18 years without it, to be honest. That means that everything is upfront, open and honest. And so I can have proper discussions with individual and groups, because they have knowledge of how we're running as a company and what is available and why we're making some of those decisions. So again, upfront, honest, warts and all, here you go, take it or leave it, really is the kind of the process we use.
And Chris, one of the questions that come in asks that question as to how, but so what's the plan for the future? So let's say, well, as we know now, we're not through COVID, we weren't expecting to be, but are you continuing the same method of communicating, or are you going to change that in any way?
As we were starting to get ready to look at how we could now we've still got a couple of people on furlough, we're still on restricted work in terms of numbers in the office. And we were starting to look at how we could bring more people in up until yesterday. So now we are going to maintain what we've got now. We're not going to go backwards. We're not going to put more people working from home, because we've got a mixture of home working and in the office on kind of a rota, and that's working really well. So much more face-to-face communication is available, because I'm seeing people, every day. I've got my own office, so it means I can come in every day without causing a problem in terms of the room, so I can keep that face-to-face contact. I still do an email update once or twice a month. I was doing it once a week in lockdown to every employee. I now do it once or twice a month with any key issues. I've just done one a couple of days ago, because we've agreed to pay all the people that were working from home during the lockdown an extra week's wages, which was one thing I got from one of the webinars in lockdown as an idea to kind of even up the ones that had several months off doing nothing, getting full pay, and the ones that were still working. We've also had a round of pay increases that were due to be paid in April that we put off, because I didn't think it was right to have people on furlough getting a pay rise. So we put that off, and they're now going to get that in November, and also the bonus will be paid in December as well. So I put that out, explaining everything, and I now do it if there's any of those big issues. And I've had lots of one-to-one chats, people just coming in and saying, thanks very much for that, really appreciate it, and just talking people through how we can do it. So not going to change anything right across the board yet, unless we get further restrictions.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Chris. I've got questions flying in, so I'm going to. We've got another 10 minutes, so but I'll relatively short and sweet if you can, but succinct with your response on this one, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So for you personally, question here: did you find the idea of becoming a director daunting? You kind of alluded to it. How did you feel about it? Massively
daunting. I'd my career in the police, I'd been, like I say, I was a chief inspector, kind of in the middle. Sounds important because it's got chief in front, but it's only in the middle. I was a firearms officer, I was a firearms commander. I dealt with quite a lot of issues. And one of the big things for me as a director and as the managing director, which really hit me after I'd said yes, was as a police officer, if anything went wrong, particularly as a commander of an operation, it's you that's going to face the whatever consequences of those decisions. As a director of a company, 25 people's mortgages are dependent on the decisions that me and the other 2 directors make. And I hadn't thought about that before I said yes. And that was a real eye-opener for me. I immediately brought in finance support because I have no idea. I had a budget in the police of £8 million, but 95% of that was wages. So I didn't have to manage any budgets. I didn't have to do any forecasting. So that was important for me to kind of surround myself with people that made me look good, I guess is the way you'd put it. And that has stood me in good stead with the areas, and not being afraid to say, actually, I've got no idea. Can you help me on this? And that comes from a technical point of view as well as from a business management point of view. So, yeah, massively daunted, sleepless nights. My wife thinking that those years of me waking up in the middle of the night had all gone. And then, 3 years on sales, nice hotels, put on 2 stone, and then all of a sudden I'm back, making those decisions and waking her up again in the middle of the night. But had to take the challenge on. I couldn't do it.
Well, by the sounds of your feedback from the team, you're doing a decent job, Chris. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just next question. When on the transition to EO, do you know if it was considered to not make it 100% in the trust, but to split the percentage between trust, but also offering out some shares for employees to buy themselves? Was that considered, do you know?
It was. We did discuss it, but we dismissed it based on the fact that we thought it was much more simple. And looking at the demographic of the staff we had, without that sounding disrespectful, we felt that buying and selling shares and the complications that brought would not fit alongside what we were trying to do.
So it didn't work for you, but as other people on this call have recognised, and other people who aren't on have recognised, flexing it and being bespoke, it can work for certain organisations, definitely.
Absolutely.
Hence why you consider it, of course.
Yeah.
So another question for you: how did you deal with the them and us between the shop floor and the office when furloughed staff on 80 or 100%?
Yeah. I kind of covered that, or a bit of that, with the fact that we've given extra remuneration to the people that were working from home. We don't have a massive them and us issue already with the office and the factory side of things. We kind of cross-pollinate a lot. There's no issues with people coming out the factory in the office asking questions. Some of the guys in the office will go out and install with the factory guys. The technical team are across both areas in the office and in the side there. So the key is, don't make people feel like they're being treated any differently. So that's where the communication levels came in, and the same message is going out to all parts of the business.
Fantastic, thank you. So long question this one. So I believe you said your background was in the police. So for people focused in a previous career rather than a business one, how much do you attribute your success with engaging your workforce to the people skills your background would have developed? So previous life, how instrumental has that been in the current life? Okay.
I'll try not to sound arrogant and big-headed when I answer this, but my personal feeling is that gave me people skills, that gave me an ability to communicate, that gave me an ability to be able to pitch my communication at the right level. It's something that was fed back to me in the police, and it's something that's been fed back to me here. So that played a huge part in me being able to talk to people. I'm not, I don't worry about talking to an audience. I don't worry about talking to individuals. I've dealt with conflict. I've dealt with, all sorts of issues before. So that is a massive transferable skill. But I had so many holes in the other areas of running a business that I just had to take a deep breath and admit it, and take the levels of support that were out there and listen to people.
I see. Another question: the bonus, if you use that term, that was issued to employees. Was it limited at 3,600 or capped at that because it's that tax advantage, or was that simply what there was to share?
No, that we decided that we would take that as the maximum to make things simple for for everybody. I know some people do a percentage of profit and that type of thing, but what we've said is that it's the directors that decide the amount based on the performance of the company. we get that decision ratified by the trustees, and then we communicate it to the staff. So 3,500 is the maximum, if you like, that we have said we will pay at this time. They all know that it's not guaranteed. They all know it could be less if the profits go less. It's based on the previous year. Our performance that we've just finished, end of July, is our financial year. We've done really well. But I have said in that communication this week that no one should factor in the fact that the bonus will be there in their finances for next year, because we don't know what the financial landscape is going to be like. Based on the profit, yes, they will be looking at that maximum bonus, but I've said not to factor it in, and I will let them know in April whether we're actually in a position to pay that or not. And they've all been absolutely on board and understood the reasons for that.
Okay. We've got a question that's coming about employee representation. So how are the employees selected on the trust? How do those two employees get their positions, and what's their role look like? What are their responsibilities on the trust?
The two employee representatives were actually chosen by Phil as the chair of the trustees. It was all communicated to everybody else that those two were chosen. One both of them are particularly well experienced. One of them had a supervisory role within the company as well, or has. So they were chosen by Phil. We decided that actually the running of the trust was down to him, and running the business is down to me and the two directors. So he's chosen. The employee representation on our monthly meeting is by election.
Actually, so how did you, with that election, because sometimes what can happen, it becomes a popularity contest and it might not be the right person. How did you ensure that that wasn't the case and you got what you wanted?
Well, the first year we co-opted somebody because no one really knew what it was going to be like. So we co-opted somebody for the first year, and then for the second year we ran an election. And there's nothing you can really do about that in my book. It was a private ballot, secret ballot, and we ended up getting a really good person. I was concerned that the guys wouldn't perhaps take it seriously sometimes, and they might elect somebody that you really didn't want, but they didn't do that. They didn't get together. They were mature about it, and they realised it's an important part of the running of the company. And so, we only had 3 people went to stand for it, out of the sort of, I suppose, 24, if you don't count me and the other 2 directors. So we only had 3 people stood, and it was really close between 2 of them by like 1 vote. And that person got in because the other one didn't realise they could vote for themselves.
Lesson learned. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Just a couple of more questions before we wrap up the presentation. The debt that's owed to Phil.
Yeah.
Is that a burden to the business?
No. Touch wood. At the moment, it's not. It's over 10 years. That Phil obviously has a debenture, so that if things go wrong with the company, then he has first choice in relation to the assets, etc. But it's all factored into our budgeting, and he's really happy with what he's come out of it with. He leaves everything alone. I didn't think he would. I thought he'd be a little bit more hands-on, but he pops in now and again, mostly just to say to me, I'm so glad I'm not sitting there with all this stuff you're having to deal with at the moment. And then off he goes again. And while he's happy, I'm happy. And so, it was set at a reasonable value. 1.5 million over 10 years works out at just over £8,000 a month.
Okay, thank you. And last question that's just come in from our attendees. You mentioned that the company supports charities. How engaged are the employees in supporting that charities? It was
something that we spoke about at that very first meeting, because obviously it's gone from Phil's money going into these charities to, in effect, their money. And they were both of those charities, although Ed was probably not such a charity, but certainly Nelson's Journey, they were all completely on board with that. They see the value of it. Most people here have got young kids, and so they were completely sold on that. And the Project Edward side of things as well, they see that as what we do. We try as a business to make a profit, but also to protect people's lives on the roads, and that's all part of it. So absolutely sold on that. And again, we keep them informed about what we're doing. We let them know, the what we're supporting, what the value of that support is, so they know exactly what's going on.
Okay. It certainly seems to link to the ethos and the purpose of the organisation, Chris, to be honest, and no doubt helps with you're not totally reliant on people thinking employee ownership is just down to a dividend and £3,600. It actually relates to this other opportunity to get involved that they have. Okay.
Completely, yeah.
Fantastic. Chris, superb. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the interrogation and the questions. Thank you to everybody for putting those questions forward. If anyone wants to do a virtual clap, we're getting a couple for Chris. We've got 3. Very much appreciated.
Thank you for listening.
So what I'm going to do now is we're going to the next stage. We're going to move into our breakout rooms. So as I mentioned at the start, this is where, when you booked your place, you had a request of first or second choice as to what topic you wanted to discuss. Our 4 topics for discussion: there's a general one, which I'm going to be hosting. Then there's the employee engagement, there's the role of elected representatives, and there's the effective behaviours in the employer business. So what's going to happen shortly is that my colleague Annabelle is going to just split us all into those 4 rooms. So we're all going to disappear out of this room, and you're going to magically reappear in the other. Your host will introduce themselves and facilitate that conversation for about half an hour on those topics we discussed. Please do. The main element is your contribution makes that work. So listen, but also contribute in order to get the conversation going. We'll come back together about 12:15, where we'll summarise what's happened, and then a few final points. We'll thank everybody, and we'll share the notes with everybody afterwards as well. So by the power of, I was never going to say Grayskull, that was He-Man back when I was a kid. By the power of Zoom, we're all going to disappear. Everyone's recognising He-Man. From this room, and we're going to magically appear into the other ones. Thank you very much.
Have you got something that's come up on your screen, Simon, to move on to the room? Anne-Marie, have you got a thing that comes up onto your screen for you to move on to the breakout room? Anne-Marie? Anne-Marie, are you there?
Hi everybody, if I could just ask you to pop yourselves on mute now that we've come back all as one group, please. Thank you.
Music. Nice.
Right, Annabelle, have we got everybody back in the room?
I believe so, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Right, excellent. So what we'll do now, just before we wrap it up, is within those 4 rooms, we'll very quickly summarise, probably about 2 minutes each, the highlights of the conversation that we've had and the topics we've discussed. And as I said, these will be captured in the form of notes, but nothing, I didn't mention this, but I will do now, nothing will be attributed to any individual or organisation. So if you said something, your name's not going to go in quote marks and then be published on the EO Hub. Don't worry about that. So I'm talking, so I'll just keep going and summarise and then invite one of my colleagues to do next. So we had 3 topics of discussion. One was around the role of the trust board, and in particular the independent trustee. Another one was on employee incentives, and another one on forming the employee council. So really meaty topics that we got into. So highlights of the forming of the trust board, and in particular the independent trustee role. It all depends, the trust board, on the size of the organisation that you have as to what's going to work well. A small SME might have 1 employee representative, an independent, and somebody that sits on the main board as well. If you haven't got multiple locations, you're not spread out over a geography, as an SME, that's probably suitable. But the important point is you flex what works for you as your organisation is one of the key points. Having a knowledgeable independent trustee. So what some companies have used, and examples in our room, they've used the independent trustee for the person that moved them to employee ownership. So their advisor, if they offer this service, became their independent trustee, because immediately from day one, they knew the ins and outs of the organisation itself and they weren't learning anything. So a bit of insight from the group there. Or alternatively, if there's another employee-owned business in your locality, if geography matters, but at the moment not so much, is somebody an independent trustee on their trust board? Is their tenure coming to an end? Therefore, would they like to leave that organisation and join yours? So you're getting somebody whose experience of employee ownership joins your trust board. In terms of terms of office, the recommendation was 4 years. The first year, usually people they familiarise themselves with the roles, and then can be more effective in the following 3 years. And to have an election 6 months before the end of that 4-year tenure, so that somebody joining, there's a handover period between the trustees. Trustee competency is important depending on the objectives of the organisation. So have people on that trust board that are going to help you deliver the organisational objectives. And in many instances, the independent trustee can be that critical friend, especially during COVID-19, where as a director you might feel isolated somewhat. An independent trustee can act in the role of a bit of a mentor, potentially, just to be the sounding board. Employee incentives. So the EOT provides that equality for everybody. And we talked about the generational differences. Younger people nowadays potentially move roles more frequently than the older generation, and are looking for something different out of work. So finding their and other people's motivational levers was a term that was used previously in another conversation. So what makes them tick around work, not just the paycheck at the end of the month? What are their interests in order to keep them engaged in the workforce, and where they feel they're adding value? So in Chris's example, he talks about the charitable work that they do. The employees involved in that can see that they're adding value in society, in the local economy, in a charitable guise as well. And informing the council, effective two-way communication. So when you say you're going to set up a council, make sure people understand what that means. Have a job description for the role as an employee representative, so you're getting the right people. And also, once people start, offer them performance management in a way of helping them understand what the role is and bringing it to life, because you don't want people to feel out of their depth when they take on that role. And having a good chair on that employee council, forum, whatever you want to call it, is really key to making it work. And they must have an interest in the company, naturally, again, in order to be effective. So I've been very brief in that summary. As I say, we'll type that up and share it with you for a bit more detail. If I can come to Ian, do you mind just summarising your couple of minutes just to summarise your group?
Yeah, sure. So for the benefit of the group, we were talking about the role of the elected rep. So there's a couple of bits that you mentioned, Ollie, that we touched on as well. I'll come to those. And just to say very quickly as well, Chris, thanks very much for your presentation at the start. I really enjoyed that. It was great to hear about your experience. The main thing that we sort of went after was a couple of guys in the group were talking about the concern or fear that some people have about putting their head above the parapet to stand as an elected rep, and what you might do to sort of build confidence and to help them overcome that. We explored a little bit around what might be the sort of the underlying issues that might have brought that about. Explored that a little bit. We talked about whether it might be possible for bodies to be identified, so an experienced elected rep to work with somebody who was just new into the role, or to work perhaps in an area of the organisation where there was concern about sort of, you know, putting yourself forward to be a rep. We talked a fair bit around the clarity of the role to make sure that people understand exactly what it is the role involves and what it doesn't involve equally. Related to that, we talked about whether there was a concern about taking on a role that felt as formal and as sort of, you know, legally constraining as a trustee role might look to somebody from the outside, and talked about how you might use the elected forum role as a means of as a way of building confidence towards helping to identify your employee trustees. We also talked about the fact that it's important to understand for an elected rep or an elected body what context, you know, employee ownership has for your business. You know, what purpose does employee ownership play? And we talked about people understanding the responsibility that they have as owners, the opportunities that presents them with, and the rewards that may flow from that, whether that's financial or non-financial rewards. We talked about creating the opportunity for the forum to grab some responsibility, perhaps in the early stages of its development, for leaders to show that they are very open to the idea of the elected body exercising a degree of influence and helping them to understand where that may be the case, and then encouraging them as the forum becomes more mature to identify those opportunities for themselves. And then one really important point that came out of that was that you really put some effort into communication, so as employee owners more generally could see and be in no doubt about the value that that body was playing, and to use that as a means of encouraging potentially future reps. Two last points very quickly. We talked about the importance of leadership behaviours, both in direct relation to the elected body and for leaders to walk the walk in that regard, but also critically for them to display those behaviours on an everyday basis, and how damaging it can be if they appear to be engaged with the forum whenever it meets, but then their behaviour for the rest of the time is completely incongruent, and you know they don't model that, you know, that curiosity. They don't sort of encourage debate and collaboration, and what people see at the forum is very different from their day-to-day experience. And then linked to that as well, we also picked up on the role of the former elected reps. Don't allow that experience to go to waste. Think about how you may organise elections so you don't lose all of the experience in one go, for example, but certainly have an active process in mind for how people who have played the role in the past can support those people coming into it now. Ollie, you still on mute, mate?
I think by now I'd be able to take myself off mute, wouldn't you? Neil, can I come to you next, please?
You can. Thank you. So firstly, thanks, Chris, for your presentation again. It set the framework up for our discussion, which was around what contributes to effective behaviours in an employee-owned business. So your presentation helped to start that process conversation, which was great. So thanks for everybody that contributed to our group. And you know, a lot of this was really about conversations around culture, really. And I think we opened with Joe talking about, you know, knowing your unique culture. Every company has its own unique culture, and it's understanding what that is. And then sort of drilling down into that really was knowing it's all about knowledge, really, I guess, knowing everybody's sort of everyday behaviours and what people are supposed to do. And that then starts to bring the responsibility of people a bit more to life in terms of about how you behave in your organisation. So it's being clear on, you know, your unique culture and your behaviours and what you're supposed to do. I think the other thing I raised it a little bit as well, but we spoke about the demographics of your company, your young and your old, for want of a better description. You know, and understanding that, you know, you've probably got a younger generation that want to make money, whereas an older generation that might have different sort of views on life, and how the employee ownership model helps bring together, you know, conversations around those areas more than perhaps they did before you're an employee-owned business. So it's about the different conversations that you have as an employee-owned organisation as opposed to the business that was before. So that was quite an interesting discussion. I think on the back of that, it was reflecting the fact that not everybody thinks it's a great idea for whatever reason. Not everybody particularly wants to get involved, and it's just recognizing that, which I think was always a bit of a shock sometimes when you think you've got the ideal model, but you've got to recognize that. And I think Pip came up with the headline, really, the framing it around responsibility and opportunity and reward for people in the business, and how that fits in the culture of your business. So everybody's got something around responsibility, opportunity, or reward. And all that good stuff really helps drive, you know, what sort of communication that you put out to people. So once we sort of understand the behaviours and the responsibilities and the conversations, and that will aid the sort of type of communication that goes out to people. And the leadership issue, obviously, has been alluded to before in terms of whoever's in there walking the walk and every day. So I hope I've summarised that okay. It's a really interesting discussion. Obviously, it's quite a wide-ranging one culturally, but I hope if I've missed anything, someone shout at me, but hopefully I've covered that reasonably off.
Thank you for that summary, Neil. Perfect. And finally, Sue, your group.
Thanks, Ollie. We were talking about how to increase employee engagement. And clearly, you know, we've been focusing very much on what we've been doing over the last 6 months or so with COVID, which has massively changed the way that we all communicate. And it was clear from the businesses that we're all trying really, really hard to find different ways of communicating, using email, using WhatsApp, using e-groups to get people together, with varying degrees of success, with some employees less engaged than others. One of the key issues that came out of that, though, was when you are having these discussions, particularly in small groups, where do those discussions go? What happens next? Because there's nothing worse than getting employees excited and engaged and coming up with wonderful ideas and so on, if nothing then happens. So one of the things that we talked about is how, from those small group discussions, however they're facilitated through Zoom, e-groups or WhatsApp, how are those then implemented? Are they taken back to a central organisation? Are they taken to perhaps specific teams that operate, have responsibility for different areas of business? For example, training might be an area where an idea is generated, and then if you've got a specific team dealing with training within your organisation, they can then pick up that action and run with it. So the importance of seeing actions through was emphasised. It's interesting to hear about age groups and behaviours from the other groups, from Ian and Neil. Neil in particular, you know, not everybody thinks employee ownership is a great idea, and certainly that came across in some aspects of our discussion. And it's, I think, a particular challenge where you might have us and them situations, which tend to come across more strongly perhaps in manufacturing businesses where you have shop floor versus managers, than perhaps a professional services where it's perhaps more evenly spread. And how do you get over that sort of us and them divide? One of the issues that exacerbate an us and them situation is those sort of middle managers. And if you've got middle managers who perhaps aren't completely bought into the idea of employee ownership, you haven't got the foundations in place of those people managed by that middle manager feeling that this is a great idea. So you're essentially trying to start employee engagement with your hands tied behind your back because you haven't got that fundamental buy-in to employee ownership itself. So overcoming those behaviours from particularly those middle managers is problematic. And it might be that it's actually a solution as significant as replacing those middle managers if they're long-term employees who've perhaps not bought into the idea and are never going to buy into the idea. And that's another discussion that we had around, were there differences in the way that you engage or the level of engagement around age groups? And we felt perhaps it wasn't so much around age groups, but more around the length of time that people have been part of the company, with those that have been there longer perhaps being less engaged than new people coming in. And we didn't have a nice, neat and tidy solution to how do you make people get engaged. Sometimes I think you have to accept that some people may not wish to be engaged, but put the structures in place to enable engagement for those who do wish to get engaged. So a really interesting, wide-ranging discussion, which I hope I've summarised and picked up all of the points on there, and not necessarily neat and tidy solutions, particularly in this challenging world of communication in a COVID world.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you to all three of you for hosting those and for feeding back. So I'm going to summarise, but don't disappear because I've got information to share with you and a request as well. So we heard from Chris. Thank you for Chris once again for taking the time and doing that presentation. We heard strong ethos in a business is critical for him, well it has been for Wescotec, and the transparency that they've had. And I've put this in quotes, cross-pollinating employees across the business so they get a greater understanding of the organisation has been instrumental for them. And you've heard the summaries of the conversations. So as I say, that'll be captured. Chris's presentation, we didn't tell him this bit actually when he signed up, has been recorded and we'll put it on the hub. And also the notes from the conversation we just had, they're going to go on there as well. So final few bits to tell you, a poll is going to appear whilst I'm talking. We very much appreciate you completing this. Feedback is critical to us to make sure we're doing the right job and we can do it even better. So our next virtual network meeting, the next time we're doing this, Wednesday the 21st of October, same time, same place. We've also got 2 EOA conversations coming up. So if you've not been involved in those are peer-to-peer discussions. And on the 7th of October, we've got one for elected representatives, which has been incredibly popular. I think we've got nearly 50 people signed up for that one. So if you or an individual in your business, one of your colleagues, is an elected representative, that is the conversation for them. It's a digital roundtable. We'll be in groups of about 10 people within that. So if you're an elected rep or you've got a colleague who is, get them to come along. It'll be really insightful. And on Wednesday, the 14th of October, it's for HR professionals. So again, you or anybody in your business that's an HR professional, get along to that conversation as well around HR in employee-owned businesses. And just keep an eye on our events page for future ones coming out. We do weekly mailers to you, EOA Connect, and also EOA Community Update. And there's that EO Boost mailer that's gone out as well. Okay. And also final call out, White Rose survey for employee-owned businesses. Without the data, we can't demonstrate the size of the sector and do the work that we do. We'll provide a link. We've got 160 businesses that have completed it so far. We'd like to try and get that to 200. The more noise we make, the more people will stand up and listen. So we'll send you the link. If you haven't completed it, please do so. So final comments, final thanks to Chris, to Ian, to Neil, to Sue for contributing. Thank you to yourselves for contributing as well. And there's some dates of when we're going to be doing this again. So please do feel free to go to our website and sign up. Enjoy the rest of your days, everybody. Thank you very much.